Welcome back to Track Talk. This is Game I of the ongoing 1830 tournament. It is being played by Tim Pelican, Foxrick, Talbatross, and a player who we will just call D. We'll jump into the auction here. Tim Pelican's leading us off, and we'll be going on the Champlain and St. Lawrence, Fox on the Camden and Amboy, Talbatross M&H, D joining on the Camden and Amboy. So not going to be a face value Camden and Amboy most likely, but the auction is otherwise pretty open. Tim could just pull here and get some cheap privates, but wouldn't be safe from the B&O with $15 of revenue and would be giving away a face value Delaware and Hudson, which seems pretty bad. So he'll go on to Delaware and Hudson himself. Foxrick, Mohawk, and Hudson. Two expensive privates for that player. Talbatross joining on the D&H, D going on the Champlain and St. Lawrence. So everything has two bids, and Tim does pull. He's on the three cheap privates. He wants to leave this auction with a lot of money, it looks like. We'll see if he ends up with any of these. Looks like he does get the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and also gets the D&H. So he's got a lot of good privates, a lot of utility with the D&H and the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and is safe from the B&O. The other three players are in a little bit of trouble here, and if Talbatross doesn't win this, he may fall in the B&O. Foxrick has a out if he passes. Looks like Talbatross gets that for 145, decent price. C&A here, these two players neither have a private at all, so they need to bid this up, I think. Goes up to 241, which is an interesting number. Is there a magic number about 359 that I need to know? I don't remember that being an important value in 1830. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me know if you are aware of something I am not. That leaves Foxrick for the B&O, who takes it and pars it at 90. So maybe seeing a B&O early float here. Talbatross is first in the stock round and will be stealing the PRR. D is passing, didn't have enough cash to float without the PRR. Tim Pelican is taking the N1H, and the B&O is going to float. So we should be able to move through this pretty quickly. It doesn't look like the PRR player did anything, didn't spend any cash. So should be able to sell and float in the next stock round. B&O's first operate, heading towards Lancaster. Looks like they buy a single two train. PRR is going to try and get a Lancaster first. Seems unlikely. Buys a two. New York and New Haven heading towards the B&M and buys two trains. Okay. So only thing that should be really happening here is paying shares on Talbatross, and then maybe we'll see D float. D does sell and takes the C&O. C&O with a B&O early float is a little bit less attractive, and they do not have the teleport, so maybe off to a little bit of a rough game here. Buys the B&O, and the B&O with a single two train is probably going to be running less than the NY&H, so surprised that they don't take that. Regardless, this leaves Tim Pelican priority here. Maybe that's why they didn't want to take it. They figure Tim Pelican might be able to sell down real early. Not sure. B&O gets into Lancaster, blocking the PRR as expected. C&O is heading towards Chicago, buys a two. NY&H drops the token in Providence. I think if you're going to do this, you want 3 two trains. But I'm going to run 2 for now. PRR heading towards Pittsburgh just to get a run. Pays it out and is going to buy in their privates, it looks like. So Talbatross has a early liquidity boost and a lot of money into this stock round. He's going to have to sell pretty heavily to float anything. Tim Pelican's leading us off and buys a B&O. Foxrick buying a PRR. I think that's the one company you don't want to buy right now. Could wait a go around of the stock round and buy it a little bit cheaper, I'm sure. Talbatross is selling and we'll be taking the B&M. It's a pretty low float. The NY&H has laid some track for you, but I think I'd be likely to sell the PRR out a little more heavily here. Yeah, somebody could potentially steal it, but really nobody has liquidity to do that. And then you can withhold on the PRR to bring your treasury back up, run some yellow shares, buy the cheap yellow shares in the next stock round. The B&M float of 67 is going to leave him struggling for permanent trains, I fear. Rest of the stock round is just him floating, it looks like. Does a little bit of trashing on the way of the B&O. and also the CNO. And we're into operating round 3 here. The 3 trains have come out, so B&O should be blocking PRR here, but instead upgrades Baltimore. That is technically a little bit more revenue, but if that's the reasoning, I think that's a little bit short-sighted. You definitely don't want to contest or let PRR in to contest you for Philadelphia and other important token locations. So running for 7D, buys a 3, buys 2 3s even, and we are on to the newly floated B&M. They upgrade Providence, immediately drop the token, and buy 2 3 trains as well. So may see a pretty early 4 train here. Who has 2 trains? The NYNH and CNO both only have 2 trains. The PRR definitely can buy the 4, but he's operating after those companies, I believe. Not operating after the CNO, so maybe that's why we saw Talbatross doing some trashing to change operating order. We'll see if the NYNH buys the 4, if the PRR does. NYNH running his 2 trains and does buy the 4. Okay. PRR only had one of those 2 trains, so not the end of the world for him, but bad news for CNO for sure. NYNH is buying in their privates, or at least one of them. Does have some higher value privates still to go, but doesn't have the treasury for it. May see a withhold in the next operating round to get those in. PRR gets into Lancaster. This is a huge mistake from the B&O player, I think. Should never have allowed this to occur. He's going to token and has a pretty good run of 100. Is not going to buy a 4. CNO, as noted, fallen back, is going to lay the number 2. Really doesn't need to do that, but I guess Figure is not running a train anyway, so might as well drop the track when you can. But I'm just saying that no one's going to be able to get to Reading Allentown for a while, so no urgency for this track right now. CNO is forced to buy the 4, and this is the CNA player, so this is painful. They're going to lose a lot of their treasury with their private buy-in. B&O second operation heads down to Washington. CNA still hasn't been bought in, so can't lay the Philly track, but what about heading over to the DIT? I don't know. I guess it's reasonable here, but really only because they let the Lancaster upgrade this way instead of giving them access to Reading and Allentown. He's going to token Pittsburgh. Don't dislike that. It secures some runs to the west. Never can be sure how Philly's going to upgrade, so tokening there is not always the best idea. Runs for 200, pays it. NYNH, no track for them. Not interested in upgrading New York yet. Pays for 90. Buying just one other private. I think he probably should have withheld there and bought in the D. Well, okay. Didn't have the cash to afford the D&H, so just doing the best he can. PRR, running his 3 train per 100 again, pays it. B&M, upgrading his home. And running for 170. Did the NYNH not have a train that could run into Boston? No, they didn't. So I suppose that's why we don't see that upgrade for Boston. CNO heads to Chicago now that he has a train. Very reasonable, pays it out. And it does buy in his private. So D has the most cash here as a result of his CNA buy-in, but the CNO's map position is looking pretty bad, and his overall game state is not great either. Just because these companies that are left afloat are really not that attractive. The NYC is a good company, but when the NYNH is working with the B&M, you don't have the guaranteed run that you would like, and the CPR and the Erie are not amazing either. So he's going to be stuck with a CNO with no money and then one of these other subpar companies potentially, unless he just buys paying shares. Looks like he will sell out and takes the NYC for max. Tim is going to sell out of the NYNH, also interested in starting a company. He takes the Erie, okay. Fox is going to buy a B&M, just going to take paying shares, it looks like. Taub, he is actually selling out of the B&M. And he's going to low float the CPR. This is a very aggressive play and may lead to a bankruptcy. He's got 3 companies with 3 trains and basically $400 between them. CPR, if it's suitcase, would be a way to rescue himself with a influx of cash, but I don't believe, yeah, he doesn't control the suitcase. So I guess he's hoping that the 5 train comes out before the N1H operates. Not unreasonable. You have 2 companies floating for 1,000, and he has the money to buy the Poison 4 and the 5 himself if necessary. Okay, I think that's the plan. But he could have his company stolen. The B&M with 2 3 trains is probably not the most attractive. Okay. D is buying the NYC. Tim is buying the Erie. Fox is buying a CNO, just buying cheap shares. Albatross is buying paying shares. And I assume this is to trash it again because he's not going to be able to float the CPR without all of his money. Does trash it. Looks like the other players are going to go back for some paying shares or trashing as well. Fox, last share for him. Looks like he's taking an N1H. He actually, okay, he buys it from the IPO for $3. Tab is now going back for the CPR. D, NYC almost floated. Tim almost floated as well. Looks like everyone's going to be floating now. D does sell a share in his company. Operating order here is pretty important. Definitely don't want to operate first if you don't need to. But Tim is probably going to do the same thing on the Erie. He does. So the B&O is going to be operating first, and the operating order of the other 3 companies is the same as what they started with. Tim goes back for a share in the B&M. And D is still buying shares as well. So a lot of these players are really diversifying their portfolios and buying these cheap companies. We are into the operating round finally. 3 new companies floated. So potential for 5 trains early here. We'll have to see. Fox is going to get into Philadelphia. Doesn't have a token to defend it. Pays for 220. First operation of the NYC. Interesting orientation for the home tile there. Would have expected them to head down southwest, especially because they're already token to Providence. So this really doesn't get him anywhere. I guess he's going to have to lay the $120 track to Boston, but that's really a bad run throughout the game. And he loses a lot of tempo in terms of trying to get into New York here. There's really no one that can contest him in New York. I mean, even if the 5 trains break immediately, the B&O is already operated, so the PR would have to lay Scranton, and then the B&O would lay Reading and Allentown. I don't think they can get to this track to block him out of New York. And then the B&M is already tokened, so he's not going to token you out of New York. This is a very strange decision. I don't know why the track was laid that way. Looks like he doesn't want to buy a 4 from the market, so he's going to shuffle trains out of the CNO, which causes that company to fall back trainless. He only has 20% of it, so I'm sure he doesn't care that much. He needs to make sure he doesn't end up in brown, though, which he is flirting with. All right, so we're going to have a little bit of a stall on these 4s. It looks like Erie is going to actually teleport to Scranton. This company also could not block the NYC from getting into this track. I think this is only possible because the NYC oriented the track this way. And it's also very unusual that the Erie is not heading towards Reading and Allentown with the Scranton track. Why is everybody laying weird track here? I guess he's anticipating the 5s coming out, the PR upgrading Lancaster, and the B&O laying Reading and Allentown and blocking him. And then because the NYC has laid in this orientation, he's going to hope to get into New York North with the Erie. Is this what D was worried about, the NYNH and the Erie colluding? But that's not possible. The NYNH, if they upgrade New York, is not going to operate before the new NYC, are they? No. Yeah, so it would still have been safe for the New York or NYC player to have oriented southwest. This is a very, I've said it before, this is a very strange situation. We'll have to keep a monitor on that. Buys a 4 from the depot, so it is possible for Talbatross to break into the 5s here. And if he doesn't, he's not going to be able to probably suitcase the CPR. Um, and I think he really needs to. He has so little cash. Getting 3 permanent trains with $1,100 can be very difficult. So, not laying track and not buying anything. That's surprising. So, doesn't even shuffle cash out of the CPR. He has 2 3 trains in the B&M. Why not, if you don't, yeah, I mean, if you don't want to run a train in the CPR, why not give the B&M cash to buy the 5? I don't know. These past 3 operations have been very weird. The NYC, Erie, and CPR. I'm questioning all of them. I don't know what's going on here. NOH buys or runs a 4 for 90. He's going to withhold. PRR, no track. Not even upgrading Pittsburgh. And the B&M, I guess that makes sense though. Maybe he doesn't want the CNO to get an immediate token there if he lays track here. Does he hope to get a token on Pittsburgh? He does technically have cash for it. B&M, going to run 2 3 trains for 170 withholding. And the CNO with a ton of cash does link up with Pittsburgh, but nobody has bought in trains. Is he going to break into the 5s? He does. Okay. So I don't know what happened in that operating round. That was, I mean, 3 companies were operating in very unusual manners. Um, I suppose that the Erie and CPR saw that the NYC had shuffled a bunch of money into the CNO and figured, well, if he's going to guaranteed buy the 4 and the 5, they didn't feel obligated to. They could just wait an operating round and hope to make it happen then. I mean, I guess that explains the decision not to buy trains on the CPR. And interestingly, the NYNH didn't actually break the suitcase, so Talbatross actually got a little bit of a break there, I would say, even by not buying the trains. But he upgrades his home instead of Philadelphia, runs for 250 and pays it. NYC does lay towards Boston. I think that was really the only option, but I really criticize this Albany track lay. Runs for 70, buys a 5 out of the CNO. We still are sitting on 2 5 trains. Nobody's been able to buy one yet besides the CNO. Erie, instead of running into New York North, is going to run into the DIT. I'm so confused by the track decisions of these 2 players. Why is that better than running into New York? I guess it's okay. So at least this way he has a run. And New York is basically guaranteed to upgrade into this track. So because he didn't upgrade this track with his New York NYNH, he had to run this track. Okay. The NYNH didn't have money. That's why. Okay. So the NYNH had to withhold to upgrade New York, and as a result, the Erie had to run into the DIT. That's very unfortunate timing for the Erie. Runs for just 30, pays it, does get a 5 though. CPR, interestingly, even though it wasn't forced to lay track by the NYNH, is going to lay its own track, breaking his own suitcase, and now shuffling a train out of the B&M, but still not buying the 5. I guess wants the 5 in a different company. The PRR can get one with just a payout, doesn't even have to withhold for it. But didn't give the B&M enough money for a 6. Nobody would bankrupt if he bought the 6. Maybe he would bankrupt. If he gets a 5 and then a 6, B&O would emergency buy the 6. He'd have to buy a D, and that would be pretty devastating for him. Only has to do that because he gave himself a run on the CPR. So I'm not sure. NYNH running a 4 train does get the New York upgrade. Withholds for 110 and is shuffling a train out of the Erie, so he has 2 trains to run again with the NYNH. He's going to have pretty good track. PRR does do the Philadelphia upgrade and is going to run for 140, pays it, buys the 5. B&M, single train because he bought one into the CPR, runs for 120, pays it, and is going to shuffle a train out of the PRR. So I think he's gambling on there being a stall on the 6s. But the fact that he has 630 in the CPR leads me to believe that he's going to buy it and then rust his own 3s. Maybe that's the move. He buys the 6 on the CPR and then force buys the 6 on the B&M, so he ends up with 2 6s, and then the B&O is left high and dry. I think that could be the move. Maybe the operating order wasn't quite right, and he was worried about the B&O snagging a 6, and that's why we're seeing a little dancing in this train shuffle, train rush. C&O gets the Pittsburgh token. Bad news for the PRR, although the PRR is pretty secure with runs through New York. The B&O has already exhausted all of its tokens. Stock round 5. Very strange operating round 4. A lot of interesting stuff going on there. I think I've explained the Erie and the NYNH's behavior, but the NYC is still very weird to me, and I'm not sure what Talbotros was getting up to. Let's move on. Stock round 5, Tim Pelicans up, and we'll buy a C&O. All these shares that were sold down in the last stock round are now going to be snagged by these players. I don't think we'll see any changes in presidency, but going to be a lot of divided presidencies and potentially room for dumps as a result. Foxrick buying the NYC, not interested in the cheap shares. Talbotros, B&M. D is buying the C&O, 2-4 trains, but it's been tokened out, so those runs are not as good as probably the B&Ms will be. Tim buying the Erie. Fox, also the Erie. The Erie with a run through New York is going to be decent. They are expensive shares, though. I think you want to buy these cheap shares while they're available. Even if you're expecting them to withhold, having them for the late game is going to be useful. Talb is up to 40% of the B&M. D is still focusing on their C&O. Tim buys a PRR. Fox, CPR. Okay. Talb is going to buy up to 60% of the PRR as well. D, last share for him. And looks like everybody's passing, so priority's unchanged. Let's look at the operating order here and who has money. So B&O's train locked. May want to withhold because it's looking like they'll probably end up with a D train in the B&O. CPR probably can buy a 6 and then emergency buy a 6 in the B&M without too much trouble. So everyone else is looking at D trains. The NYNH, B&O, and the C&O. The C&O has a bad D run. The B&O's D run is pretty good. And the NYNH's D run is acceptable as long as Scranton remains untokened. And nobody's really in a position to get a token down there. The NYC would have to lay some weird track to get down there. All right, B&O, 2-3 trains, runs for 300. Does he withhold? It's going to pay. Probably the last time we see that, though. NYC is now upgrading Albany. Okay. Runs for 80, pays it out. I think we're just seeing them, suffer the consequences of this track lay. This orientation of the track is really bad. Erie does get into New York finally. Doesn't have money for a token. Runs for 140, pays it. PRR, laying Reading and Allentown. Would be interesting if they get the double gentle curve upgrade here, and then you would see a run for the B&O and the PRR into New York North and South potentially. Runs for 240. NYNH should definitely block that from happening. Are they invested in the B&O or the PRR at all? Tim on the PRR, one share, B&O, one share. So I think it's definitely in their best interest to block those two companies from getting into New York um, North. And there's a valid upgrade, this kind of X-looking tile, tile 47, that would block not just the B&O and PRR, but also the NYC. So I think that that's priority number one here in terms of track decisions. Instead, laying track into Albany. You can lay that track at any point. I don't think that that's a priority here. It does block the NYC player from laying the sharp turn here to get into Scranton, but I don't think that's, I don't know. I guess that's a higher priority for him so that his NY and H run isn't cut than preventing this link up here. Well, only had one opportunity to block and has missed it. CPR links up with the offboard and pays, does not buy the 6. So we're definitely seeing a stall, a deliberate stall from Talbotros here. The only way I can explain this is he worries that someone would bankrupt and he would lose on a bankruptcy. But I think he's decently positioned. The B&O would fall back, wouldn't bankrupt, but would be behind Talbotros in terms of net worth. And then the next person to operate would be the NY and H, who would have to buy a D or shuffle. Also doesn't look to me like they're at risk of bankrupting. And at that point, the PRR and the NY&C would have both run. The PRR's run is going to be better. I don't think that Talbotros needs to be worried about losing on a bankruptcy. I'm surprised that he's not buying a 6 here. The track that we worried about has indeed been upgraded. Talbotros looking out for his PRR with that. Runs for 210 is withholding. I guess he's also wants to get a D train in one of his companies with these withholds. Not sure. C&O is going to run for 230 and withholds. B&O going to get pretty good runs here. 320. Did get to run the 3 trains again. I did not expect that. I thought they were going to rust. Somebody has to shut that down. I mean, his revenue is so high right now. It's like $100 over everybody else. He's got 60% of the company, 80% of the revenue. I think it's a mistake not to rust those 3s. NYC running for a little bit more. Really doesn't have any track opportunities. Needs to upgrade Albany and start heading over to Rochester. Pays for 90. Erie upgrading Scranton. Runs the 5 for 150 withholding. It's going to shuffle a train into out of the NY&H. Why does he want money in that company? I guess with a withhold, he's done the math that he can pick up a 6 there. Is he going to snag a 6 before Talbotros can? That's a huge miss from Talbotros if he does. PRR runs for 260 and pays it. CPR is going to pay and does finally buy the 6s several operating rounds later than he could have. And doesn't leave himself enough money to lay this track either. So his run is going to be stuck at 80 unless he withholds again, which I'm sure he doesn't want to do. NY&H heading over towards the double O's, withholds and buys the 6. And Talbotros is now forced to either shuffle or buy a D train. He could have had both 6s, but missed that chance. And does shuffle. Shuffles money into the CPR of all places. Maybe he realized he needed that $80 for track, but that's a lot of money to give the CPR. Is he setting himself up for a dump? None of his companies are dumpable. Not entirely sure what he's been doing. C&O is heading over towards Scranton. A token on Scranton from the C&O would be pretty good. The B&O is going to have to buy a D here, I believe. And does. The NYC is heading towards CPR. Why not Rochester or Scranton? This track is Very strange. Erie, looking to get over to Dunkirk and Buffalo. Pays it. PRR. 5 train. Good 5 run. 260 pays it. CPR trainless is interested in heading towards Albany, it looks like. And it's going to have to shuffle again. A D train in the PRR is okay, but it's only going to add another $40 to his revenue, it looks like. Or, yeah, only adds $40 to his revenue. So, well, I guess we'd have to sit down and do the math to see if this run is better than heading down here into the Baltimore track. NYNH is trying to block the B&O and C&O from getting into Scranton, and with that track upgrade has managed it for now. Pays for 220. B&M running a 6 is going to pay, and the C&O is going to end up in brown, but he has enough of the presidency that he's safe, and can shuffle or just out of pocket a D train. Probably doesn't want to out of pocket a D train right into the stock round though. No, he would have no cash for shares. So he does actually do it. So literally has no cash for shares and is, I think, probably going to be eliminated from the game as a result. Pausing to look at the game state here, we see that Tim Pelican and Talbatross are our leaders in terms of net worth and shares. Talbatross has a fair net worth lead right now, but that's a little bit misleading because he owes, $500 for a D train in the PRR. Does have a lot of money for shares in this stock round, so hopefully can buy paying shares that are operating earlier than his PRR and use the other player's revenue to pay for his train. I think that's, and hopefully won't have to sell shares when he does it. Tim Pelican, on the other hand, is a little bit vulnerable on the NYNH, would like to see some players pressure him for those cheap shares. And his runs are cuttable at Scranton. So some long-term liability for the NYNH there. So I guess I would favor Talbatross here. The PRR is going to be a powerhouse. The B&M's decently positioned. CPR is terrible. But with a withhold, maybe could start making some money by running into Albany and Providence or Boston. The other two players I haven't talked about because I don't think they have much presence in this game at this point. The B&O run is good. Definitely should see those shares bought early in the stock round, but he is far enough behind in net worth and shares that I'm not overly concerned. And he's just a single presidency player, so going to lose a little bit of power on the map. And then D has $0, so should be falling behind quite heavily in terms of share density. Tim is up first, buys a B&O. Fox is going to sell an NYC, presumably for that B&O. Actually, not yet. Is just selling shares and then buys in New York. Okay, so he's going to try and pressure for that presidency. That'll never happen. Tim can easily defend. This is painful, though. This is something that's going to force Tim to invest in the NYNH other than other shares that he may prefer. Taub is going to snag that B&O, courtesy of Fox giving it to him. D is out of this auction, or out of the stock round, it looks like. Tim is going to have to defend. Fox is going to keep pressuring. Talbatross is getting to buy all the shares he desires as a result. Tim still stuck on the NYNH here, and he's actually buying from the IPO instead of the market. Fox seems pretty devoted to making you buy these shares. I think you should just buy the cheap market shares. He does buy the market share. Taub is still buying the other players' high value shares that operate before the PRR, getting a lot of good shares here. Tim goes back for the NYNH. Fox has to pass. Taub is going to buy that last cheap NYNH. So Tim bought all the expensive IPO shares and everybody else got the market shares. Tim is going to buy an NYC. And then Talbatross is a little bit limited here in the sense that he has the most cash, so he's going to be going last in priority. Needs to make sure he doesn't open himself up for a dump. Now, if he wants to be clever, he could, in theory, sell shares with an emergency buy to buy the shares in the stock round and then save himself from a dump in the future. But in terms of dumpable shares, I guess the Erie is probably looking like a safe investment because it's behind the B&O. B&O is going to float up. Um, it would probably be possible to change that operating order with 3 operating rounds to make it dumpable, but it would be painful in terms of withholds to make it happen. So I think he's safe to buy the Erie here. Going to go for an NYC and another NYC. This, on the other hand, seems much more dumpable. The CNO would have to withhold for cash to do it, but the NYC is not a good company, and maybe D is feeling spiteful. He's not going to win the game, but maybe he wants to take Tabatros out with a dump. So this is a little bit less safe. But again, Tal may be assuming that he's going to sell that share before the next stock round anyways. Does he buy another share here? He buys the B&M from the IPO. Fair enough. And he has a pretty big share lead now, 10 shares on the 2 trailing players and 6 on Tim. We'll see how many shares he has to sell to afford a train. D run of the B&O now. Upgrades Washington. And I think it should have upgraded this track here to get a run into Pittsburgh. Well, no. I suppose it would be $10 more to run into Cleveland. Eventually, he's going to want to upgrade this so he can run into Chicago or the Gulf, but as the track stands right now, not worthwhile. Although also could have upgraded the double O, and I think that would be some money for him too. For now, paying for 370 NYC, not laying any track. Still not interested in heading over to Rochester or Scranton. I don't know. Pays for 100. Tim Pelican, Erie, going to lay the Dunkirk track. Runs for 190, pays it. PRR trainless, needs to fix that. He's going to sell the NYC, so he was aware of the dump potential. And actually has to sell the Erie as well. That's a lot of shares. His share lead is kind of evaporated here. I'm surprised he didn't try and shuffle and just keep those shares. Does buy the D. CPR probably should be withholding for track points here. Runs for just 80, pays it out. NYNH, upgrading Dunkirk again. Pays it. B&M, running for 230, tokened everywhere. Nobody is interested in heading towards Rochester. It's very strange to me. CNO, running a D train. He is working on getting into Scranton here. He does not have the companies to make it happen. It should be possible for this to be blocked. However, Bino, I suppose, is going to operate first. So if he cooperates, they will both get runs into New York North, which I think is the B&O's interest to do so. Running for just 200. B&O does do the upgrade. Unfortunately for the B&O, the C&O has tokens. So a token in Scranton is going to cut this run, and he just helped the C&O out by getting there. Is he invested in the C&O at all? Not really. C&O will have to withhold to do it, but may want to withhold now just to eventually stay yellow anyways, although it really needs cash for shares. Runs for 380, NYC, finally heading somewhere. Running for 100, pays it, Erie, getting to the second double O here. Runs for 160, pays it, now has money for the double O upgrade since nobody bought those market shares, or actually not because nobody's bought them, because Talbotros had to sell them. PRR gets into Rochester and is not really able to run that track with his D train. He's only able to get that upgrade because of the New York token here, but this is not actually a valid run for him. Doesn't have money for the token either, but with 2 pays in the next 2 stock rounds, may have enough for 1 before, or in the next set of operating rounds. So it's going to run for 300 and pays it. So with another run like that, we'll have token money, which is nice. You won't have to withhold for it. CPR running for 80. I think you just have to bite the bullet and just withhold one time so you can start making your way west. These runs are so bad. One withhold, if you can run, next 6 operating rounds with higher revenue, is going to pay for itself. NYNH Links up with Rochester, and there's a nice loop that's been built here. We need to see some tokens come out to cut this up. Pays for 280, B&M, 2-3 train, oh sorry, 6 train, not 2-3 trains. Running for 280 and is actually able to take advantage of this loop to run into New York North and bypass these dits. Still have to hit Rochester, but increasing his revenue by 50 bucks. Nice. D train on the CNO is going to lay it so that he can run into Rochester and then back around through the 00. But it's actually not doing that. Would that be a better run? So this is $100 here. This is 80. Yeah, so this run is not optimal. These games are not played with the auto router, but should be clear that this is less money than running into New York. B&O, D-Train is going to start heading towards Chicago, probably realizes that these runs are going to go away eventually. He is running the more optimal track into Rochester in the 00, so good to see someone's recognize that. 450 NYC doesn't have token money yet, but should in a moment, and is also able to run that track. So 230, which is just enough for a token. Erie also has token money. Does he want to lay Hamilton, Toronto, or does he want a token somewhere? Lays the track. 220, pays it. PR's D-Train is running for 320, and that will give him token money as well. So this, all these runs are going to be much lower in the next stock round, next operating round. He also had the opportunity, or has the opportunity now, if Rochester remains untokened, to lay track for the CPR, which would be massively good for him. If the CPR is able to get down into this loop here, that would really change the game state. His 6 shares here would be much more valuable. But that's only going to be possible if nobody tokens in Rochester. And there's going to be, I think, 2 companies, well, the NYC for sure, with the ability to do it if they want. CPR runs for 80. NYNH, no tokens, running for 280. B&M, 280. He's withholding just to stay yellow there. CNO is still running. No, he did change his track. Okay. Running for 330 and pays it. So stock round 7, we see net worth wise that Tim is now in the lead. Foxrick, on the back of some monstrous B&O runs, has come back into this game. I discounted him too early. Still has a massive share deficit. And I will note that Taub had to withhold, so his net worth is probably better than what we think. D is up and buys a PRR. Tim is going to buy a PRR as well. Fox going for the brown shares. CNO. Taub is joining him. D, CNO. Tim is going to buck the trend and go for the B&M. Fox buys out the CNO. Taub looking for the yellow B&M shares. And now we just have more expensive shares on the Erie NYC left. CPR might also get bought because everybody has a lot of money, but it's not very attractive right now. See this NYC going, and it's sold out. Erie should be next. Actually, Tim is detouring for the CPR, and that's because he's not share locked on the Erie. Makes sense. The rest of the players will get the Erie, and then the CPR should sell out as well. Taub is unfortunately unable to buy that, so D gets an extra share. The share lead between Tim and Taub is only 2, and Tim is leading by $500. Part of that is because of the withhold on the B&M. And if we think in the future, we think that these D trains are going to be much less lucrative than they have been. We should be seeing some tokens come out here. So I think that favors Tim, actually, because Taub is the one running the D train. It's hard to cut a 5 run. So yeah, Tim might be off to a win here. We'll see. Looks like everybody passes, and the B&O is up. Should be the last run of this D train. Enjoy it while it lasts. 450 pays it. NYC, where's he going to token? I guess Rochester or I don't know. I'd have to think about this in more detail. Any of these tokens look okay. Rochester would be the safest. He wouldn't have his runs cut. He does token there. So that's going to be bad news for Talbatross. I think he was probably really hoping that he could get this track laid for the CPR and get him down there. Runs for 230, pays it. Erie, not enough for token money, but is able to get a double O. And just has a 5 train. A little bit surprised that they orient this towards Rochester. I would have thought that they would have laid the track out west here and tried to hit all these double O's. There is an upgrade with a sharp turn here that would let him run into both of these double O's, so maybe that's the goal. Runs for 230, pays it. PRR missed out on the good track and is going to be running for 310. Is actually only losing $10 on his run. Pays it. CPR, still not withholding. Should have done that a long, long time ago. NYNH, paying for 220. B&M. And sorry, we saw a PRR token come out. So that is going to cut the C&O run into New York North, the B&O run into New York North, and the NYNH run out of New York. B&M running for 230, drop of $50, and he is able to get that track for the CPR finally, but it comes after Rochester's already been tokened, so the run into New York North is not going to be possible, but at least can run into Boston now. C&O is not laying any track. B&O, is he going to get into New York here through the number 2 tile? No. So why not? Is that track not available? Sharp upgrade? It is. So that's weird to me. Maybe he wasn't going to run into New York regardless. But I think that the New York run would be better than, or sorry, the Chicago run would be better than running into this offboard here. So he needs to upgrade here and then get a sharp upgrade here to run that. Yeah, not sure. This straight child doesn't get him anywhere interesting. NYC, 5 train. Run has been cut and running just for 150. Pays it. Erie does get the upgrade that we were talking about, so his run is set. Runs for 260, very good. PRR, still running for 310, pays it. CPR, first good run for him, and it's for 150. NYNH, 220. B&M, he is flush with cash from withholding to stay yellow and is laying a bypass here. I don't know. I guess he thinks that benefits the PRR. Hard for me to tell how. We'll have to watch that run. C&O. Not sure what that is. I guess just looking to block the B&O. But doesn't really block him since there's an upgrade here. Runs for 200. B&O is heading towards Columbus. So I guess he's going to try and upgrade Columbus into the Gulf, but definitely had better options. Running for 370. Pays it. NYC. 200. He's taking advantage of the same track upgrade that the Erie was taking advantage of. Erie, run is unchanged at 260, pays it, PRR. So doesn't use this track that the B&M laid. I don't know what this track was aiming for. Runs for 310, pays it, CPR. 150, NYNH. Pays for 220, B&M. 230 is withholding again, but unable to stay yellow. I guess he just wanted to give himself the opportunity of selling 1 share instead of like 5 shares. That is a nice move. You can reduce the number of withholds by doing it that way. C&O is running for just 200, and we are into stock round 8. So everyone's over their cert limit, but there's going to be a little bit of game of chicken in terms of if someone wants to sell the B&M down before Talbatross. I don't think it makes sense for any of these players to do that. They would be doing him a huge favor if they did. But this is going to force everyone to sell their shares. Talbotros can sell a single B&M to get below his cert limit and then start buying up better shares if he wants. Tim is going to sell a CPR and a B&M. He actually does it. Wow. So that means that Talbotros doesn't actually have to sell any shares at all. That's crazy. Fox buys the B&M, and then Talb is free to buy the CPR. Oh, actually, he can't. Okay. So Tim played that fine then. He had to sell 2 shares, but he didn't give Talbotros a share. Nice. It's still a net gain of 2 shares for Talbotros because Tim had to sell twice, though. So D ends up with that CPR share, and we should be into the next set of operating rounds. This is operating round 8, and looking at the market, the bank is going to break. So let's just figure out who's going to win and just skip through it. Tim is up by $700, trails in 4 shares. The runs are close enough between Tim and Talbotros's companies that I don't think the status quo is going to change. There's really no tokens to be dropped to cut runs at this point since nobody has cash. So I think Tim's just going to win. The loop up here being cut and the D trains faltering allowed his 6 and 5 to be enough. Let's skip this and look. Tim wins by $500 something. And the player that I discounted, Fox, actually ends up second above the player we've been talking about. So I definitely counted him out too soon. And I think that's just because the B&O runs were pretty monstrous for a while. So nice comeback from Fox. I just can't get over that one operating round with all that crazy track. That was operating round 4. And I'd really love if one of these players or multiple of these players could leave a comment about what was going on and why they made the decisions they did. I think we started to figure out Tim's decisions. It came down to the NYNH not being able to upgrade the New York token tile. But what was going on with the NYC and Albany? That was weird. And I think Talb has watched some of these videos. If he could give us some input on the CPR decision making, that would be great. Figure out if he was worried about someone bankrupting, and that's why he wasn't buying the trains. Regardless, Tim wins. Well played to him. Was able to run the NYNH and the Erie for enough revenue to survive those monstrous D runs, and he's going to be advancing to round 2. Thanks for watching.